ISFJs are so nice. I have so many ISFJs in my life and I love all of them. Like, I just have like almost no issues with ISFJs. They're such a nice type. Really just like friendly, the type of person that you would want as your friend. I notice tons of like maids of honors and best men at weddings are ISFJs and ESFJs because they're a loyal, great friend. They care about people and they have longevity to their friendships. So I love ISFJs. Such a nice group of people. One thing I noticed is that there are a lot of mistypes. Sometimes the tests are like reliably wrong. You might take the test 50 times, get the same result, and it could still just be reliably wrong. Like if you don't change the way you answer and the test hasn't changed. I notice a lot of times they're like one letter off. So you might want to look into the ESFJ, the INFJ, the ISTJ, and the ISFP, and just maybe take a look. ISFJ might be a good description, but there might be another one out there that's a great description. So if I get into this and any of it seems like it's not resonating, you might want to look into that. So if you just found out about like that you're an ISFJ and you found out about like introvert versus extrovert, sensing versus intuition, there's actually a whole level deeper and actually stems all the way back to Carl Jung in the early 1900s, and he coined what are called cognitive functions. And there are 8 of them, and they're basically just like 8 ways that your brain works. Since the early 1900s, they've since hooked up people to the EEG machines, and they find that certain personalities will use different regions of the brain more often than other people use parts of the brain. So certain personalities are really keyed in on body language and emotions, and certain personalities are really keyed in on moving their body and being good with tools. Some people are really keyed into like the mathematical part of the brain. And there are all sorts of parts of their brain, and different personalities will use the regions more often than others will. So after the early 1900s, Myers Briggs came along and they said, okay, if you use this function and this function, we'll call you the ISFJ. If you use this function, we'll call you the ENFP. And there's kind of a code for where they got those names from. But since that's kind of been lost, and now all people really know are like introvert versus extrovert, sensor versus intuition. So I want to describe like what the code actually means. So your middle 2 letters are kind of the meat of this code, the S and the F. So everyone's second letter is their perceiving letter. It's how you perceive, it's how you learn, it's how you take in information. And for ISFJs, that's like sensory information. That's like their memories, what's happened to them, kind of like structuring things. And everyone's third letter is their judging letter. It's how you make judgments, it's how you make decisions, it's how you decide this decision is better than this decision, and like what criteria do you use. And for ISFJs, that's like external feelings. You know, the best decision is the one that makes sense for the most amount of people and will get more people's needs met. So if you're a J, it means you extrovert your judging letter. So for you, that's feeling. So it's extroverted feeling, abbreviated FE. And so it means you're oriented on the external feelings. Some personality types are oriented on their inner feelings, but ISFJs are oriented on other people's feelings and groups' feelings. And they might feel like an empath. So Js extrovert their judging letter, and it just automatically means you introvert your perceiving letter. So introverted sensing. And then since you're an introvert, what that I means out front is you dominantly prioritize the introverted one, and you secondarily prioritize the extroverted one. So your first function is introverted sensing, and your second function is extroverted feeling. But there are 8 cognitive functions total, and everyone uses 4 of them dominantly. So the way you find your third cognitive function is the direct opposite of your second one. So since your second function is extroverted feeling, the opposite of extroverted is introverted, the opposite of feeling is thinking, so introverted thinking is your third function. And the way you find your fourth function is the direct opposite of your first function. Since your first function is introverted sensing, the opposite of introvert is extroverted, the opposite of sensing is intuition, so extroverted intuition, abbreviated NE. Is your fourth function. So these pairs, these opposites, like your second and third function are opposites. These are kind of like a yin-yang polarity. They're the exact opposites, but they come together and they kind of complement each other. So even though they're the direct opposites, they come together and they form kind of a complete picture. Same with your first and fourth function. So in this video, I am going to I'll touch on these definitions and I'll explain in the ISFJ how these kind of come together and they work in healthy or unhealthy ways. If you want to know more about just the functions in general, all the functions, I do have a Myers Briggs 101 playlist, and it goes from like simple to complex, and so it goes kind of chronologically. In that playlist, I have a video, what are the 8 cognitive functions? I have a video, the 4 types of introverts and the 4 types of extroverts. And in those 3 videos, I go into deeper definitions about all 8 cognitive functions. So the ISFJ's first cognitive function is introverted sensing, and everyone's first cognitive function is who they feel like they are. It's what you're using 98% of the time. It's who you feel like you are. So introverted functions kind of organize and they distill down. And then sensing means you're paying attention to what goes on out here. So you're kind of taking sensory things, basically experiences that you have, and you kind of organize them inside. This story you were told, and this story you were told, and this experience you had. You kind of organize them all inside, and you have kind of like all these memories. And it kind of creates all this meaning in your life. It's like your life is one book. And all of these experiences kind of come together and they build to who you are today. Who you are today is kind of the sum of all these experiences that you've had and all these memories that you've had. And since your fourth function is extroverted intuition, it's like what could be. Introverted sensing is more like what has been. So introverted sensing is more oriented on the past and making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel and getting in the groove with things and having a career for a long amount of time so you can get more and more and more skilled. Like ISJs do so well at careers that take a long time to become excellent at it, and they will take the time and they will take the longevity and the loyalty and they will become so good by the end of it. And since extrovert intuition can be kind of like, I don't want to call it like sloppy, like trying new things, introverted sensing is very particular. It's very organized. It makes sure that it does things in a methodical way and it learns things over time. I used to be a teacher and my ISFJ students were some of the most well-behaved students, excellent students. I mean, introverted sensing is a great just like student function in general. It likes to learn things from other people. I think it kind of likes to be given orders, but it really just likes to do things like the right way. I also noticed that because it's kind of like taking and organizing all your experiences, I notice a lot of ISFJs love pictures. I see so many pictures around their homes. Really warm. I see like a lot of signage. So ISFJ's second function is extroverted feeling, and everyone's second function, they're kind of hesitant to go to because it's a little bit out of your comfort zone because it's extroverted and you're an introvert. And the opposite would be true, like if you were an extrovert, your second function would be introverted. So everyone's a little hesitant to go to their second function because it's a little bit out of their comfort zone. But you are an ISFJ, like you are an F, like you need this function. You already use it. You probably use it maybe 60% of the time, or maybe you always use it at home, but you never use it at work, or, maybe use it in some contexts of your life, but not others. It's really important for ISFJs to boost up this function. It's because I feel like introversion and extroversion are both needs in the same way that food and water are both needs. And just like with food and water, you might have a preference for one or the other. Like maybe you prefer food to water, but you need both. Like it doesn't matter if you like food more than water. You still need water. Like if you want to survive. And I feel like that's how introversion and extroversion are. Like you prefer introversion, maybe it recharges you. That's who you feel like you are. Like when you're at home processing your memories or thinking about the day or thinking about a vacation you had or having a fun experience for the second time and like reliving it, that's who you feel like you are. But extroverted feeling, that will really give you fulfillment and really stretch you and get you out of your comfort zone because like food and water give you two different things and that's why you need them both. And that's introversion, extroversion, same thing. Introversion will distill down and give depth and clarity and wisdom. And extroversion broadcasts it, it impacts people. And what extroverts tend to do is they tend to get too extroverted and they get very scattered. They're impacting people because they're around a lot of people, but then they start feeling run ragged and they're too busy and they feel very scattered. Introverts tend to get too introverted and they tend to be like a sloth and not get anything done. And when they are introverting, maybe it's just watching Netflix. It's not really impactful introversion. And it really makes them lose impact on people. And so it's so important for everyone to have both. It's so important for everybody to be like a little bit of an ambivert, to use their top two functions. So you get that introverted sensing, you get that extroverted feeling. So extroverted feeling is all about the external feelings. It's how other people are feeling in the room. And ISFJs don't have any function that's introverted feeling. Like some people are focused on their inner feelings, but ISFJs are focused on the external feelings. That will lead them to take certain actions, like they want to make their homes warm and inviting because when you're so focused on everyone's feelings, like it's important that those are good because you don't want to be focused on a bunch of negative feelings. So you take a lot of actions to make sure that there are good feelings in the room. I see a lot of ISFJs like taking people's plates, greeting everyone when they come in the house, giving people big hugs, anything that tells people like you are welcome here and you're seen. And they really kind of like sometimes will orchestrate the group conversation to make sure that the conversation is going in a good direction. And this is a good function for ISFJs to get into because for one, it's extroverted and extroverts tend to just be like more initiating with things. Like they'll initiate conversations more often or they'll initiate like, hey, do you want to go hang out? They might bring up new topics of conversation more because introverts and introverted functions tend to go deeper on one conversation, whereas extroverted ones tend to expand and explore. So this gives ISFJs a little bit of like exploring different topics, initiating different topics of conversation, especially if they might be difficult. It's expressing your feelings. Like if you want there to be harmony in the room and you work on extroverted feeling, you want there to be harmony in the room, that includes yourself. So as soon as you realize that something's a little bit off with you, instead of being too introverted and keeping it to yourself, it's important to kind of like extrovert that and speak up and like initiate the conversation to say, hey, you know what, like actually you did this and it kind of hurt my feelings, so I think maybe we should fix this. And it can be, one and done. You have a 5-minute conversation and then you're all good to go. And I think that could be really good for ISFJs. So I think sometimes people's second and third function act kind of like a light switch, like you're in extroverted feeling. That's kind of like the angel on your shoulder, or the light switch can flip down and you're in introverted thinking, and that's kind of like the devil on your shoulder. And especially when people are younger, they will tend to flip the light switch down. And so I notice what can happen is ISFJs might use kind of a shallow version of extroverted feeling, which is just saying, I just want to keep the peace. Even if under the surface there's not true peace and I'm kind of upset deep down, this person's upset deep down, I'm just going to make sure that there is no external conflict. And so I'm going to do everything I can to avoid conflict. But that is a bubble that eventually bursts, and you can only fake harmony for so long before the truth comes out. And all of a sudden, we are flipped down to introverted thinking, and the truth is going to be nailed down. And especially in conflict, people go to their third function in conflict, and it's like, you know what? I'm just going to tell you how it is, and this is how it is. And the conversation is not very harmonious. This can be sometimes, I notice ISFJs and INFJs can have blow-ups in relationships. They kind of have these codependent relationships where they get this best friend, and the best friend maybe wasn't that good of a person, but because of extroverted feeling, the ISFJs kind of let it slide, and they're like, you know what, I just really want to take them under my wing. Maybe they're not the best person, but I want to take them under my wing. And eventually, because they're the type of person that you take under your wing, eventually, they do something that hurts the ISFJ's feelings, and it's eventually the last straw, and we're down in introverted thinking, and the door is slammed by the person's out of their life. And then the ISFJ feels really bad. So I can notice sometimes the ISFJs can be like 98% of the time an extroverted feeling. And sometimes maybe they're not using it in the best way, maybe not the most full, well-rounded way. Sometimes it's just conflict avoidance. And then 2% of the time, introverted thinking, and it's harsh and it's icy and it really blows up relationships. So I think it's important for ISFJs to be an extroverted feeling more and to initiate those hard conversations a lot sooner. Don't let it be a codependent relationship that goes on for 8 months. Really initiate those types of conversations a lot sooner. Don't get into introversion and avoid conflict. Get into extroversion and pursue conflict head on, because when you pursue conflict early on, it's not even that bad. And that can really lead to restoration in the relationship. And I think a lot of people feel closer to people after conflict if it's handled in a good way and it doesn't, drag on for forever. So ISFJ's fourth function is introverted thinking. And so it's the opposite of extroverted feeling. It's like your inner thoughts, what makes sense to you. It's introverted. It's kind of taking out, I have this belief that's not true, so I'll take it out. And it's kind of always making sure, like, am I being accurate? Am I being precise? Taking care of its inner thoughts. This is a strength for any of the ITP personalities, any of the TP personalities, really. But for ISFJs, it can be just self-criticism. Like, for ITPs, they would use it in a depersonalized way. Like, oh, I said Monday and I meant Tuesday. Okay, it's gone. And it's not like it's personal thing. But for ISFJs, it can be very personal. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I'm a terrible person. And just very self-critical. And that can make ISFJs kind of sensitive to criticism, because the ISFJ has been gnawing at themselves, like clawing at themselves. You did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. They make this big sore, metaphorically. And then so someone else comes over and they poke some like tiny criticism, and the ISFJ is like, oh man, that was really painful. But the reason it's so painful is because they spent all that time being self-critical. And so you gotta cultivate extroverted feeling, cultivate that harmony within yourself. Like, don't just cultivate that harmony with everyone around you, like include yourself in it, and in your brain, make sure that there's harmony in there and you're not being so self-critical. It leads to kind of like a self-sacrificing on-off switch. It's like, you know what, we're gonna do everything for everyone else with extroverted feeling, and then the light switches flip down. No, it's no one's needs. It's kind of the phrase like, if mom's not happy, nobody's happy. That reminds me of extroverted feeling users, because extroverted feeling users spend a lot of time making sure that everyone's happy and everyone's feeling good. And then as soon as they feel like, you know what, it's been too long, no one's paying attention to my own needs, boom, it's all about me. Mom's not happy, nobody's happy. And the environment just gets kind of poisoned. And that can be kind of a bad thing, like with introverted thinking. I think it can make ISFJs kind of self-conscious and insecure. Introverted thinking is kind of always digging at itself, like, what's wrong? And it's supposed to be in a depersonalized way, but ISFJs make it very personal, and they can be very insecure about different things, kind of picking themselves apart. When you have like hints of introverted thinking, it can lead to like passive aggressiveness or like dropping hints. I think ISFJs, because they have that extroverted feeling, so they're anticipating everyone's needs. And I think sometimes when people don't understand, like if people don't know about personalities, for example, and understand that people are using different regions of the brain and they're just literally thinking differently, they can think like, wow, this person's not thinking about my needs. They know they should be thinking about my needs all the time, and they're not doing it. So they're intentionally doing this to spite me. Or maybe they think, wow, this person's really thoughtless. And it's not these people are trying to spite you. Like if you're not, like maybe you're like dating someone and they don't have extroverted feeling, and you're like, wow, why aren't they thinking of my needs? it's like just really not on their radar. They're just really not using that region of the brain, and that's kind of the cost of specialization. Like, they just have other strengths that they bring to the table. You know, they have other things that you love them for, and the cost of that is they're not going to have extroverted feeling. And so that can be kind of a bummer, I think, for ISFJs. But you just have to know that other people are not anticipating needs the way that you are because they have these other strengths. And so you just can't take it personally if they're not doing it. Just try to be grateful for the things that they are doing in their own skill sets. And so if they're not meeting your needs, it's kind of important to say, okay, what are my needs? You think about extroverted feeling, and you're part of that. So what do I need? And then you communicate that to people in a kind way, you know, that's really straightforward. Because I think passive aggressiveness and dropping hints, people are not really maybe going to get the hint, or some people don't like feeling manipulated like that. So a lot of people don't respond well to passive aggression or dropping hints. And I think sometimes ISFJs don't even realize that they're being passive aggressive or dropping hints. But it's important to just be really straightforward. I think sometimes, you know, if you get to introverted thinking, that is very, like, anti-emotional. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes ISFJs can avoid with that function. They kind of avoid their emotions. It's like bottle it up, because they're like, I don't want to get into conflict. I want to avoid all conflict. But I think it's just important to get into an extroverted feeling and say, you know what? You can take charge of the conversation. You can take an offensive stance. You can control the conversation. You can initiate. You don't have to feel defensive, like, oh, I don't want to hurt this person's feelings. I don't want to step on their toes. I don't want to say anything. If you get a little more extroverted, control the conversation. I think ISFJs communicate things so kindly that if you can just get on it sooner, the conversation's going to be great. I think you don't have anything to worry about. So everyone's fourth function is kind of like off switch. So like just like the second and third functions with the off switch, the first and fourth functions are like that as well. And I feel like people are switched on to their first function like 98% of the time, and their fourth function like 2% of the time, especially when younger, and that can really create some issues. I think since this function's extroverted and you need to work on extroversion a little bit, I think you should add this into your life, bump it up to like 10%, because sometimes, like, if you're trying to get more into extroverted feeling, sometimes introverted sensing, introverted thinking are so introverted and they like weigh things down, and it's like extroverted feeling can't do it enough on its own. So you like need a little bit of extroverted intuition, just a little bit of it, so that kind of the extroverted winds can prevail at least more often. And extroverted intuition's all about seeing patterns. And extroverted functions kind of expand. So they're saying, what could happen? What about this? And it's all about inventing and ideating and creating. I think this gives ISFJs a little bit of a creative side. I notice a lot of ISFJs are very crafty. It's spontaneous. I think it's be good for ISFJs to get around people that are really different from themselves. Just explore people that have different religions than you, that are from different places, and get a broader worldview. Because I think sometimes introverted sensing can be really closed in to say, this is where I came from, so that's good. But it's good to just expand your beliefs. I think it's good for ISFJs to develop extrovert intuition because it can get rid of something like that fear of change. I think a lot of ISFJs are just so scared of change, and extrovert intuition users are excited about the future and exploring what could be and all the possibilities. But I think to introverted sensors, especially when they're young, that just makes them a little fearful. Scared of change, scared of what could be coming around the corner, scared of the future, you know, really liking the way things are now. And so if things change, it's like a little jarring. Give you some creativity and some inventiveness. Like sometimes like my only criticism of ISFJs, they're trying so hard to be crowd pleasing that they become a little bland. And this extrovert intuition gives you like that goofball side of you, that creative side of you, the quirky side that's different from other people. Instead of just trying so hard to fit in and not step on anyone's toes. Like, this really just gives you a vibrancy to your life. I think extroverted intuition, you know, it's always on to the next creative project by people that are using this as a strength. And I think sometimes introverted sensing can really hang on to grudges. It really remembers the past and things that have happened. And extrovert intuition's a little bit more happy-go-lucky. It's a little bit more optimistic, you know, and it's like, you know, that didn't go well, but we don't need to hold a grudge or be bitter about it, so we're moving on to the next thing. And it can just be kind of like optimistic, and it can help you move on. And, you know, like if you're stuck in the past, it's because you don't have anything better going on in your life right now. So get some new opportunities, some fun new things, get some new friends, be a goofball, show that crazy side of you, and, you know, just let go of bitterness, really like process things that have happened in your past. Sometimes, because extroverted intuition is all about the possibilities. And I think sometimes if you use extroverted intuition negatively, you say, this person has a hidden agenda. This person's gossiping about me behind my back, and I have this piece of information, so that means they're doing this, and this person said this to this, and you create this whole story. And it's a possibility. It's an extrovert intuition possibility. This could be happening, but you gotta get back to, you gotta like ground yourself and say, like, is this really happening? So I think for people, like when we talk about these back two functions, these third and fourth functions, the rule I always say to people is like try to only use them in a positive way. So if you're using introverted thinking in a way to be critical of yourself or be insecure, you gotta just say like that's a no-go. We can only use introverted thinking if we're gonna do it in a positive way. Same thing with extroverted intuition. So you know what? We cannot analyze possibilities negatively. We're not going to say some disaster's coming around the corner. This person's going to die. We're not going to be safe. This person is gossiping about me. They hate me. Like when you're analyzing possibilities, you can't do it in that way. You got to set a rule with yourself. You can only do it in a positive way. So you can have positive new ideas. You can be optimistic about the future. You can have crafts and hobbies and be a goofball. But if you're going to use extroverted intuition and introverted thinking, you have to set a rule only in a positive way. Yeah, before I get into just kind of like the vibes and the unique gifts of ISFJs, I do also have personality coaching. So like if you want any more like personal growth, like strategies, I've been really enjoying the conversations I've been having on Instagram. You can just like DM me on Instagram. It's Alexis M. Kingsley. I've really been enjoying the conversations, really like deep, impactful conversations. I've been enjoying that so much. The vibe I get from ISFJs, they're just like so nice. Introverted sensing has a bent on history, I would say, or any like older books. Like I seem to hear a lot of ISFJs liking like Pride and Prejudice, like these really like tried and true books. I've heard some, I don't know about guy ISFJs. I think ISFJs are one of the most likely personalities to really be molded by their circumstances. So depending on the household you grew up in, ISFJs can be very diverse from one another. So it really depends on like if an ISFJ was really like if you're like a female ISFJ and you've really been molded to cultural standards, I think a lot of ISFJ women would probably be into Little House on the Prairie, Anne of Green Gables. I bet male ISFJs really being molded to those standards would probably like historical things as well, but maybe historical war movies. I think maybe like Saving Private Ryan. Just kind of, like the classic tried and true movies or books. Yeah, and for that reason, because ISFJs are so molded by their experiences and there's a lot of like cultural gender stereotyping going on, I think ISFJ men and women could look very different from each other just because they're so molded by their experiences. Like there's just different things that societies say is appropriate for men to do and appropriate for women to do. And so I can imagine they've been very molded differently. I can imagine like male ISFJs are very likely the type to be very like chivalrous, like they'll want to get the door for people or pull people's chair out because like it's a socially appropriate thing to do and you're kind of like taking into account the needs of another person. I could imagine that if you're an ISFJ guy, that it's been hard for you to not get in that loop because I think in general culture encourages men to be thinkers and women to be feelers. And so if you're a feeler guy, I bet you it's been very hard to not get into introverted thinking because I just think like as a guy, introverted thinking is respected more. So I think maybe if you're a guy, you probably have to work on extroverted feeling more than women might have to because I think culture just encourages women to be extroverted feelers in general. So I could imagine women of this type have an easier time being healthy and getting into extroverted feeling than guys do. This is not something that I would typically associate with ISFJs, but for whatever reason, when I think of a lot of the ISFJs I know, a lot of them have their own businesses, and they're kind of like small businesses, like self-employed, kind of like the mom and pop sort of thing. Like I've a lot of that, and I actually wouldn't expect that, but it kind of makes sense because ISFJs do so well with things over the long run, and they build relationships with people. Like, if an ISFJ owned a coffee shop, they would know the names of everyone who came in, and they would know their regulars, and they would treat them with such kindness. There's a coffee shop in town, and it is run by, like, in my opinion, the baristas are, like, all ISFJs. And ESFJs, maybe, like, an ENFJ, but whoever's doing the hiring loves FJs, and it really has created a very good culture. I sometimes, back to the, like, when mom's not happy, nobody's happy, I kind of do get that vibe from that coffee shop though. It's like 98% of the time I go in there and everyone's like all happy, like, hey, how's it going? And they're so nice. And there is a percent of the time that I go in there and you can tell that maybe there's some like drama happening with the baristas, or it just seems tense. Like it just feels tense. And I could imagine they're getting into introverted thinking. That's just like, you know, the thing that happens, conflict resolution. ISFJs can be kind of avoidant of it. And they have kind of a mixture. You know, if you have like an ESFJ and an ISFJ, you have all these different relationships to conflict, and none of them really liking it, but then having different relationship to conflict management. But I think the thing for ISFJs is, in any of the FJs, I mean, with conflict, what happens is it's a cycle. So what happens is, because of extrovert feeling, you're a little nervous to get into conflict. So you avoid it for a long time. So then when the conflict comes around, it's very heightened because that's weeks worth of conflict that's been boiled up, and then the past gets drug into it. And because of introverted sensing, you're like, well, in the past you did all this, and then introverted thinking comes out and it's icy, and it creates kind of these very dramatic conflicts. which reinforces the belief that conflict is bad. But to get out of that cycle, you have to experiment with different kinds of conflict and, engaging in conflict in different ways to kind of get rid of that belief that conflict is bad, to kind of get some experiences that say, conflict brings people closer together. And depending on like what your home life was like growing up, I could imagine that would also create some beliefs about like what conflict is like. It's like to all like the FJs, I've been recommending the book How We Love, and they go over, it's kind of like attachment styles, but to me it's kind of like conflict styles, and they talk about like how different types engage in conflict, and that has so helpful. And for types that are kind of conflict averse, I think that'd be really helpful. It just talks about like there's this type which is kind of conflict avoidant, and this type which basically molds themselves and changes themselves, constantly checking the emotional temperature of the room. And anyways, they have podcasts and stuff, and they talk about the cycles, like if this type of conflict person and this type of conflict person get together, this is the cycle they get into. And I don't know, I found that sort of thing very helpful. I think an ISFJ would like that as well. So yeah, ISFJs are just like the loyal long-term friend, the best man at a wedding, the maid of honor at a wedding. ISFJs are so incredibly loyal, and they take care of people, and they're there for people. I respect ISFJs so much, so well-rounded. The world just functions with ISFJs. I mean, they just make the world go round. So yeah, I love ISFJs. I do have a Myers Briggs 101 playlist if you want some more info on some of this stuff. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.